Hello, everyone. Welcome to B&H's afternoon panel. Our discussion today is digital cinema trends here at NAB. 4K, 8K, HDR, high dynamic range, VR, virtual reality. We've got a really special panel here today. I'm going to ask each of them to introduce themselves. First off, I'm David Leitner. I'm a New York director of photography, sometimes a producer-director. Been in the field for many, many, many years. That's my background. Also, I guess incidentally, I was a technical director at Duart Film Laboratories years ago, so I have a foot in both post-production and production. I'd like to start on the end there.
Sure.
Phil Holland.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Phil Holland. I'm a director of photography based in Los Angeles, California. I had a large visual effects background before I went full out on my own as a director and DP. And I shoot a lot in the air with a helicopter as of late, but also on the ground for various commercials. Yeah, that's a lot about me. I'm really into technology, and I'm really into glass and shooting large format. Yeah.
Great. I'm Stephen Poster, ASC. I'm a director of photography, or as Vittorio Storaro would say, I'm a cinematographer. I did promise him on my next film I would be calling myself a cinematographer and not a director of photography. I'm president of the International Cinematographers Guild. We are a trade union. We are national. We have over 8,000 members across the country. There's some of them sitting here in the audience, and we represent in the industry directors of photography, camera assistants, camera operators, digital imaging technicians, still photographers, very important component in our union, and publicists, just because the union gave them to us. What can I tell you? And I was past president of the American Society of Cinematographers. I'm still active making movies. Thank you. And I love this show. This show is always a great opportunity.
Thank you,
And
Stephen.
Josh?
I love this show as well. My name is Josh Haney. I'm the Vice President of Operations for Light Iron. We're a Panavision company. We're located in Los Angeles, New York, New Orleans. We've got a couple of other locations that we're going to be announcing soon. We are a post-production finish house. We also offer remote dailies and support for episodic features, some commercials, and documentaries. Prior to that, I was managing director at eFilm, a deluxe company, for 13 years at that location. Worked on a number of digital intermediates. Before that, Sunset Digital. So basically, my background is finishing, post-production. That's my world. So happy to be here, and thank you.
Great. So I'd like to start off by asking, what have each of you seen here that you think is groundbreaking? And feel free to add what you, in the process, what you think about the 4K is an accepted fact now, but 8K, NHK has their 8K theater over in North Hall. If you haven't seen that, you should. What do you think about that? And does HDR enter your work yet, given that it's right on the cutting edge?
Yeah, yes on all of those things. I'm primarily a red shooter, and I'm one of the very fortunate people to be shooting with the Red Weapon 8K VistaVision. I have one of those cameras. And I also have the 8K Super 35 Helium as well. And I am finishing in 8K. I'm also finishing in HDR as well. Mostly finishing out to 4K these days, though, realistically. So capturing at 8K, scaling down to 4K, much like our film workflow on features where we would scan it at, say, 6K and scale to 4K or 2K, whatever, and then go back out on the laser recorder. I think in terms of what's been groundbreaking for me at this particular NAB, so far it's really a story of glass and format size. We now have a lot of new lenses being released for all of these different format sizes, from Super 35 to VistaVision and to 65 millimeter even. So it's from a cinematography perspective, it's rather exciting, and the glass is coming in at all sorts of price points. We have, like, I think Sigma with their Cinema Art lenses. They're probably the cheapest primes at the show.
Least expensive.
Least expensive, yes. Not cheapest, yes. Because they're actually quite good.
Yeah.
They're very good.
The
I've used them already.
Yeah, they're wonderful. I have shot recently quite a bit with the Tokina Cinema Vista Primes. I have a short film showing here. I think a really good story is the Zeiss CP3s, because the CP2s were kind of a game changer in terms of the industry, putting affordable optics into that price point when the 5D Mark II came out in 2008. So now this is sort of the DNA moving into a bigger brother with lens data at a very low price point that's never been seen before. And then what do we have? We have the Cooke S7s for VistaVision as well, the Leica Talias for 65 millimeter. So I'm all jazzed about the glass. There's some new lighting tech I'm very excited about as well. But I'll let you guys take it from here.
I like that you started at Super 35 and went up from there.
Yeah, it was kind of all my favorite formats. I like working in VistaVision probably the most, honestly, but Super 35 is like, I don't think that's going to change as the bread and butter format for the industry. There's a lot of power behind that particular format and how glass plays with it and all of that. Plus the camera size can be, kept down pretty small.
Speaking of VistaVision, have you shot, I call it 8 perf. Still photographers call it full frame.
So I've been fortunate and have the film background, so I have worked on VistaVision, and I've even put some of the classic lenses together that I used to use on those cameras back in the day for the modern digital cinema cameras from Red, and now Panavision's also using that technology behind their DXL. So, and they have a ton of glass options that cover all of these different format sizes.
Forgot the new speed Pancros.
Yep. Those, well, are they? They're what's old is new again. On
exactly.
Those,
I mean, Stephen, you probably used the original speed Pancros.
I think I did. Yeah.
There you go, Stephen.
And the ball towers. Hello, hello. Good.
Yep.
Am I a fan of the K-Wars? No. I really am not. And I think that what we're striving for. 4K, 8K, 4K, 6K, 8K, $1, whatever. We have to find a level where we are not losing the ability to suspend disbelief. If you're talking about narrative, if you want to look out a window, go see that 8K monitor or the 8K display from NHK. I've been watching that for how many years? It's been around.
Quite a number.
And it's great. It's like looking out a window. Looking out a window is not telling a story. And I think that what you see in terms of the vintage lenses, now that's what they're calling them, the vintage lenses, is taking the ability to record that much information and taking it down to where it's a level that an audience doesn't have to see every pore on every face of a poor actress's physiognomy.
Yeah, I think that's largely dependent. I mean,
no, it's not.
It's
not. There are physical and emotional and neurological experiences that go beyond allowing someone to suspend disbelief. I'm telling you, I'm working with Baylor University and their neurology department, and we're doing brain scan testing to determine what part of the brain is lighting up. And when we finish this research, you are going to see that there are certain things that affect the audience emotionally.
Right.
And part of it is too much information. So I find a way to use vintage lenses and diffusion in a way that allows the audience to then come into it and suspend disbelief. And I think that's something that we have to be very careful for. It's great to have the overhead of 8K. It's great to have the overhead of the Red Weapon and the 65 Alexa and the Panaflex, the Panavision camera. It's great to have that overhead, but my objective is to take that overhead and use it for something else and squish it down.
That I can agree with you.
I'll take overhead anytime. When we started scanning at 6K, it was great to have that overhead. Now that we have, I just shot with the C700, which is phenomenal. It's like 16 stops of dynamic range. But what did I shoot? I shot 2K 12-bit. To me, the next K-Wars is not going to be resolution, it's going to be color depth.
I agree with that.
And I really believe that to shoot a 2K 12-bit as opposed to 4K 10-bit is it's a much more pleasing format.
Yeah.
I think that's unanimous. I saw foreheads nodding as you said that.
Right.
What have you seen that's breakthrough here?
You know, I think this is an incremental year. This is not necessarily a breakthrough year, although there's some terrific lighting equipment. In fact, go to Matthews. They have a kit that blew me away today of how to use baby heads, juniors, on all the various different attachments in one set that is convertible from any size to any size. Now that's a piece of mechanical equipment, but it's really
You mean
really,
for mounting?
Yeah, for mounting lights,
right.
it's really brilliant. But most of what I've seen is incremental. Tiffin, for instance, has some wonderful new neutral densities that are so clean. I tested them up to 2.1, and there is no IR pollution in them. They're called the nats, or the naturals, in reference to Nat Tiffin, the father of the company. But those are great. The new, in fact, at Tiffin also, the Volt. If you haven't seen the Volt, it's an active gimbal in a little thing. You put your iPhone on it, and you can run with it, and it's just remarkable. So those are incremental improvements. I think I haven't seen anything that is so breakthrough that is causing a lot of excitement.
I would say that some of the things that I've seen, because I have to be agnostic, I have to deal with GoPro all the way to 8K. The bit depth discussion is so exciting, but it really affects my world in the size of the files. And so the folks that are on the perimeter that maybe, we're all taking cell phone breaks, I'm finding little things out there. The smaller companies that are coming up with automation, they're coming up with metrics, they're coming up with some software things that are going to make our workflows better, because really our goal is to create convenience. Make it very convenient for the filmmakers, for the studios, for the budgets, and make it as seamless as possible, because we're in the business of also helping to educate the folks that have to deal with all of this stuff, and it takes a lot to learn it. They just depend on us, the professionals, to figure it out, make it simple. So I've found some really great things on the peripherals of the halls. Some new folks that are coming out that are taking the chance to say, I'm going to go to NAB and offer up this little thing, and that's been pretty exciting. These little nuggets that we find that are in the very backs or in the little portions.
Yeah, I do that too. I wander around the edges.
You wander around the edges, and you never know what you're going to find. It's pretty exciting.
Yeah, it's exciting.
Yeah.
Right. Two things I've noticed. I think the two big stories this year are glass, I agree with you, and HDR, because HDR is on everyone's lips, and everyone's a little bit fearful. They're not quite sure what they're getting themselves into. They're 3.5 standards, you might say now. It's percolating, it's not settled down. We don't quite know how it's going to affect us directly. I'm a fairly heavy, I only shoot log gammas, and I'm a fairly heavy DaVinci Resolve guy, and so I grade all my own footage, and I know how to bring the skies down and do all that kind of thing. So I'm already fitting 14 stops into a 709, Rec 709 contrast, what's allowed. But what I'm noticing in HDR, and I want to ask your opinion about this, I've noticed two things. I've noticed, one, that chromatic aberration created by the lenses is much more visible now. Because in HDR, the appearance of saturation is greater, and fine color differences, fine detail, seem to be more apparent. The second thing I've noticed is that faces. If you have big pores on your face, and you've got a lot of shine on your face, watch out. Have you guys noticed anything like that?
I'm working on a couple of interesting things. I have been working in HDR10, and I'm currently working on a Dolby Vision project. And I think what's frustrating from my perspective is HDR is trying to use the heavy mallet to sell it. A lot of people are showing off demo material that's like really bright and really dark. And as you're mentioning, you're seeing more of the chromatic aberrations. You're going to be seeing more of the camera noise because of the contrast levels. But for what's more exciting for me about HDR is its promise to deliver better color and better dynamic range on a visible level. Because like you said, you're already fitting everything into a smaller container, so you'll have a slightly bigger container, and that's where the art form is going to be. When we have a film workflow, and for the bigger studios, like the work I've done for ILM or Rhythm and Hues and like that, we have a 16-bit pipe. So when we go back to film, we're going back out at 16-bit. So if you're talking Dolby Vision, you're talking 12-bit, and if HDR10 is 10, really the art and craft with HDR, right now we're in the baby steps still. I would say this is like toddler years. We're learning how to walk. Soon, as people start to unlock its potential, there'll be much more nuance, and you'll be exposing differently, and what you'll be getting is truer, vibrant reds, more interesting skin tones, more variation, subtle hues. That's what's exciting for me more about HDR than having an explosion like clip out to bright white and 4,000 nits and explode your eyes. No, it's about using that highlight roll off and exposing accordingly and finding a beautiful image that will fit in that format. That's what it is for me.
My catchword with HDR is just because you can doesn't mean you should.
Right.
And I think that's something that as artists we have to be very cognizant again. Again, it's great to have the overhead, but do I want every shadow to be visible? Do I want every window not to be burned out if I wanted that effect? So, you know, we have to use it tastefully. It's to me, it's a matter, I just personally, I cannot shoot without diffusion on the lens. I can't shoot without having some way of messing up the image. And if it's so perfect and you have range from the morning to the night, you know, if you have that kind of range, you have to be careful about how you're telling the story.
On that point, we had a HDR session, and we had mastered for P3 theatrical release, came back for the Dolby Vision Pass, and there was a scene that the cinematographer didn't want to see the filament in the bulbs. It was a very crucial scene. You started to see the filament of the bulbs, and your eye went to that as opposed to what was going on in the actor's face while he was about to make a very important move. And the cinematographer said, no, don't, you know, clip that out, get rid of that, I want that out of there. So that was an interesting thing. There's a couple of things with HDR that I want to go over is that we, again, we have to remain agnostic. We have to have these offerings, so we have to be educated and understanding the Dolby Vision route. One thing that's really interesting is a few years ago we were at a tipping point. Was our master film, or you know, was it digital cinema? We've been getting questions on now, is our new hero master for the finish of the show, is that going to be the HDR pass? Is that going to be the final, and then we'll make all of those elements down? So we're in that tipping point of scheduling these things and working them out. But what we've also done is in our testing phase. So we get involved early on when we're testing the different cameras, lenses in our pre-dailies process. And now one of the stops on the testing train is, okay, now let's take a look at, we've seen it projected, we've seen it in 709, now see it in Dolby Vision. And as cinematographers, you make the choice of what you want to do. And that's really critical, is to show that HDR in the testing phase.
I've got a very critical question for you.
Yes.
When you're mastering in all the formats, and you do an HDR and you do a standard range, which do you do first artistically? Because I've heard two different opinions on this.
Artistically, we've been asked, that's where we're at the tipping point. Most folks, they see that HDR, they want to start with that. But however, the P3, the DCP, is what needs to go out first. Sometimes on the theatrical side, we have to feed the international markets first. So that now controls the schedule if that needs to go out first.
I've heard, just not in terms of scheduling or anything, what I've heard from people who have done HDR masters, that they'd rather start with the standard master and then go to the HDR, because once you do the HDR, it's very hard to go back to standard.
Very true.
So that's I'm taking notes on that. Because,
well, I think we're in that tipping point, again, where we were at maybe 5-6 years ago, maybe even more, of was our film print the hero, or is our digital cinema element the hero, P3 versus film?
Yeah.
And so that's an interesting thing that we in the finished service have to navigate and walk through with filmmakers, studios, producers, all of that.
On film, though, I always did the biggest format I could possibly first. And then by the time I get to pan and scan, I walked out.
Yeah, we still have pan and scan.
Yeah, I know.
On this topic, I think one of the more interesting variations we're finding these days is we have digital streaming distribution that has HDR and SDR going out.
Right.
So people can be experiencing two different versions of the content. You can have your best friend watch a film, and you can watch a film and have a slightly different experience. And that's also a weird variation we've never had in the industry before.
Right.
It's interesting you mentioned streaming because HDR can't be encoded into ATSC, at least the current ATSC. So it can't be broadcast. It can be streamed. You can get it over the top.
Yes.
You could get it through Blu-ray. Of course, you can go to the theater and see it in a cinema, but you can't get it over the air. Now, that's interesting. That's never happened before. ATSC 3.0 will include the possibility of encoding HDR, but not the current broadcast standard of the United States. See, that's kind of territory we haven't wandered into. There's another. I want to ask you about something else. We capture the images. We post-produce the images. We tweak them, get them just the way we want them because we're artists. Then we send them out into the world. So we're only wrestling with half the equation. What about all of those flat panel displays coming from all over the world?
That are all set on motion interpolation.
Some of which can reproduce an HDR standard that's open. Some of which are trying to reproduce an HDR standard that's not open. It's proprietary. Are you concerned that you're never going to see that image again that you saw?
I would be super happy if we could all agree upon a certain type of standard that could be universal across all manufacturers. All of this motion smoothing or even the sharpening, some of the noise reduction even kills some of the weird details. You'll see artifacts on like tendrils on clouds and stuff. But I'll say this, I'll go backwards. One of the biggest problems on the feature films I worked with back when things were hard, the guy who hired me first in the industry many years ago was the guy who invented the 4K film scanner in the mid-90s and won the Technical Academy Award for that. So I have a background in this world, and it was always hard, very hard, to get the film that we were creating at the studio into the eyeballs of the audience because of the variation of motion picture prints and just aging and how many print runs and things like that. Digital held and still holds all of that potential to allow content creators to create a visual master and allow for people in a properly calibrated screen environment, like a digital theater of some sort, to see what the creators intended. And the closer we can get to the time where that is just the norm, because we're spending millions of dollars on productions, you know, sometimes hundreds of millions of dollars on productions. And it's a travesty that the audience member who's actually paying for it is seeing something that, say, your big director didn't really sign off on, or your award-winning colorist didn't sign off on.
But you're describing theatrical exhibition.
Oh, I'm talking just the screens too. Having a standard across the industry on all of the LCDs, OLEDs, whatever is going to be happening.
Well, LCDs and OLEDs can't really
No, that's another variation.
But hang on a second. Are you aware that every set delivered to a consumer in America is delivered in what's called dealer mode?
Yeah.
And that is all of the bells and whistles of motion interpolation and smoothing and sharpening turned up as high as they can go.
Don't forget
every
saturation.
Set and saturation. Every set in America that is delivered to a consumer is in that mode. And it's very hard to go into the menu if the set allows it and turn that off, because there are about 4 or 5 different components that you have to know to turn it off. And it's motion interpolation makes everything look like a telenovela. It's really terrible. We've got a petition called Stop Motion Interpolation that you can sign, get online and sign. And the reality is all we want is a button on the remote that says movies, sports, you know? It would be very simple to do. And we're talking to manufacturers about it. But this idea that the engineers and the marketing people think that we have to give the audience something that is so abhorrent to us as the artists. You can't watch a narrative piece in motion interpolation and see anything that doesn't look like live television. The minute you get off of 24 frames, you lose that ability to see to make it look like a narrative piece.
Yeah.
Yeah, don't go over to the NHK 8K,
I
120 frames per second display. You won't like that.
In 1990, I did an experimental piece for NHK and Sony and Panavision. Was one of the first narrative pieces ever done on HD, and they asked me to see if I could make a motion picture on one of the new cameras, and it was an analog camera. It was a tube camera at the time, and I said, "Well, what's the script?" And they said, "What do you mean script?" I said, "Who's the director?" "What do you mean director?" I said, "Well, you want me to simulate making a motion picture. What did you think I was going to shoot?" "Oh, just on the beach with a couple pretty girls." I said, "That's not a motion picture. That's not telling a story." And we ended up doing a 15-minute short. Yeah. So, because that's what we were trying to do. And I tried very hard to break the camera, and I did a few times. We had a cable about that big going back to a bread truck with all the broadcast equipment on it. It was a very interesting experiment.
Yeah.
You know, the question I want to ask is, what happens after 8K? Speaking of the Ks, do we go to something else? I don't know. I'm not there's no answer to that.
Well, I have an answer, actually.
Do you?
Okay.
I wrote a white paper called The Window Effect, which has everything to do with human visual acuity. And also, I mean, I'm not disregarding the art and craft of cinematography, adding filtration and producing something, crafting an image rather than just trying to look through a window, even though the paper is called that. I've been fortunate to work with 70mm 15 perf IMAX, and probably one of the few people to properly scan it at the correct resolution, which is quite high. You know, we're looking at 11 to 14K, maybe a little bit beyond. It depends on the film stock. But that's also very, very difficult, very, very expensive, and time-consuming. So what does that mean for us? Well, I think right now in homes, we're really trying to navigate 4K adoption. I think we can all say that 4K is really happening. There's so many benefits to it, and people tend to enjoy it. I can just walk around here and watch people watching the 4K displays, and they're like, "That looks so good. I got to get a new TV." I'm just behind people. Like, it's kind of spooky sometimes. I just want to hear what they're doing, you know, and that's what they're experiencing. And I know so many people are going by that Dell booth and looking at that little teeny 8K display. Yeah. You can't see a damn pixel on that monitor. That is a beautiful thing. And it is like looking through a window, but all of the images that they're showing on it are literally like, you know, still images, a slideshow. They want you to see that kind of detail. Beyond 8K, I do see things that would lead to a 10 and 12K finish. Beyond that, the only real solution for me is 16K, and then let me get there. 16K as a format has a lot of power, because when you start talking about VR and getting the correct resolution per eye, that is also something that's very powerful. So getting to a medium that is that flexible and that hopefully digital artifact free, so it's just a clean medium that will project the glass, project your filtration, project your choice, and having that detail that you want captured, that smoothness will be there, no pixelation. Then you actually have a proper medium, that digital medium that will be probably around for a long time. Beyond 16K, if we ever go beyond that, I have no idea what's going to happen.
We won't be around.
But
you know, a little kid born today, won't know what a pixel is.
That's, well,
you won't see them.
Yeah, maybe.
Not like we did.
Yeah, not like we did.
You've seen the little kids like pressing the magazine pages to see if they can move things around. It doesn't.
Right.
But just to make a note about
going up to a television and doing that.
Yeah, just to make a note about HDR and resolution. It's very interesting because I've been at NABs a lot, and there's a lot of like conversations that we're having. Resolution versus dynamic range. Your choice. I don't want to be that divisive. I'm an image creator at my core. I want it all.
Yeah.
If it's the difference between shooting high dynamic range 2K and lower dynamic range 4K, my first question is, why can't we shoot high dynamic range 4K?
It's not zero-sum.
Like, why is it so like?
Yes,
it feels like you're arguing with a child. So
exactly.
You know, I did an interesting experiment on the last film I did. It's coming out in June, called Amityville. It's another Amityville, yes. Where they wanted to, we had shot in 12-bit, okay, and they wanted to scan at 8-bit to save money. And I said, no, you're gonna lose. But no, wait a minute. Listen to what happened. I said, no, let's do a test. I want to show you there's a difference.
Right.
once the material had been captured at 12K, we did 8-bit, 10-bit, 12-bit, and 16-bit. You don't lose, if your original material is 12-bit, you don't lose the color depth going down in terms of remastering. It blew me away, blew everybody away.
Right.
It just was that it was built in. It was built in naturally.
Right.
You'd already graded it though.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the nature of it. So
Sure.
when if you're capturing an 8-bit and then working an 8-bit and then going back out at 8-bit, that's the bad news.
Absolutely.
But
Yeah.
12-bit to say 10-bit or 12-bit to 8-bit or 16-bit and all the way down, that's what you have that flexibility with. So that's moderately understandable. But 8-bit is still risky, I think.
Oh,
for
yeah.
gradients.
Absolutely.
Phil, you brought up VR, and we should touch on that because there is a little crest of a wave of VR here.
Yeah.
You go over to Nokia in the North Hall and look at what they've got. A lot of stands have little VR demos. What do you think? That the idea that we need even more resolution because VR would require us to look around, that's intriguing.
I am absolutely excited about VR. I've been able to work in VR, but I am also madly in love with a two-dimensional image. And I just saw something actually with Gordon Ramsay shot in VR where it's Gordon Ramsay at a counter and everything, and it's this whole room, and it's one of those shoots where they shot 180 and then shot 180 reverse because they cleared the crew. But like everything we're focused on is right here. It's not here. So it's kind of freaky. But also in my little window effect paper, I talk about what's really important about a VR experience. And one of my most disturbing things, and as we get into augmented reality as well, right now VR is not a very casual experience when it comes to watching motion picture content. You put this thing on, you lose out your world. You can't flip over your burger that you're cooking in the kitchen while the TV's on or anything like that. You're going to burn yourself because you're going to be cooking blind. But what I think will be really powerful for VR is productions that focus on your field of view in the periphery and not worry so much about what's going on at the back of your ponytail. That's the real world of VR, and I think people need to focus more on the resolution of where it can be an immersive experience when you look around and let people sit down and enjoy the content that way. Because I'll tell you, it's very rare, unless I'm watching a horror film, to get up and turn around.
Remember Cinerama?
Yes. Right, exactly.
I know Stephen remembers Cinerama.
Yep.
What,
you could look
Cinerama.
around.
I saw the original Cinerama in Chicago.
I did.
At the Mike Todd Theater. Right. But I have to say, VR, there's a lot of money being put into VR, but they have not come up with a solution for narrative work. A story is directed by a director to have an audience show what the director wants the audience to see. There is no solution yet to make VR work for narrative. I've seen a ton of stuff. I've seen a few things that might even get close, but you have this impediment on your head that takes you out of the ability to suspend disbelief. The other problem is they can't solve the problem of VR sickness. So you're talking about 20 to 30 people, 30% of the population who can't watch VR at all without getting sick. My friends at Baylor have been working with some of the VR companies to try and solve the problem. Resolution doesn't help. Frame rate doesn't help. It makes it worse. So, is this a format that we're going to see mass storytelling on? I don't think so. There's great uses for it. There's wonderful.
I think the potential for video games is
video
very
games,
high.
training, medical stuff when the resolution gets better, real estate, all of that is terrific. But telling stories on it, the jury is out.
On our side, we get a lot of discussion. We talk a lot about it. When it comes down to it, it kind of falls off.
Yep.
It's like, let's do this, let's plan, we're going to do this, we're going to do this testing. Then when it comes to it, somewhere along the line, it doesn't come back. So we don't get a lot of experience in it as far as actually doing it, but we've talked a lot about it. So, seen some items here that have been great, but it's just where is that push with either the studios or with the Netflix, the Amazons, that type of thing. So we're waiting for it.
I mean, you know, AR, I don't know how AR is going to fit in narrative work. I don't think it will. But to have these tools to use for other purposes, it's a great idea. But to do entertainment on it, you know, unless it's a sport or you know, something like a Cirque du Soleil.
Yeah.
These are good uses of it. But
Exactly.
But just in terms of storytelling, I don't think it has it yet.
Last year, Ang Lee showed a 10-minute clip, I think it was, of Billy Lynn's
Right.
halftime walk
Yeah,
here.
I saw the original.
And do you remember that someone asked Ang afterwards in a Q&A?
Yeah.
Ang, you've done HDR, you've done, you know, high frame rates, you've done 3D, you've done 4K, you're using laser projection, Rec 2020, all this stuff. What are you going to do next? VR? And Ang said, he thought about it for a second. He says, yes, I'm going to do VR. But the thing is, you're going to look in the direction I tell you to look. You're not going to look over there. You're not going to look over there. You're going to look in the direction that I take the story where I want you to look. And other than that, you can look wherever you want, but you're going to look that way. Yeah. That's my VR.
Right.
And I thought that summed it up beautifully.
Yeah.
And I think some narrative content will find success with VR because I can definitely see POV style of storytelling being very powerful. But in terms of the art and craft of motion pictures and how many people have spent their lifetimes developing techniques to move the camera and frame people and block people, VR's got a lot of problems with that. And VR works better as a stage play. You end up directing it like you're directing a play, more or less. But still, you can't solve problems. If you try to cut and then go into close-up, you feel like you're jumping through space and time. Right. And then you can't always have someone walk up and show you something. That's also weird. So we're going to get there. I think some things will have a lot of success, but I think for a lot of how we experience a movie, I always kind of view it as a painting. You know, I'd like to see it up on a wall somewhere and enjoy it that way, because that's kind of what it is for me.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
but I have some friends who are working with or experimenting with creating a theater setting in VR so that the surround is the theater, and then doing the VR within that. So which is interesting.
The VR that was really compelling to me was the high school student that had 5 different choices of where he's going to go to college. The high school student that had, you know, the football player, if you will, that had 5 different choices of where was he going to go to college. And then one coach said, here, I want you to watch this. And it was the entrance in running into the big house in Michigan. Where did the kid sign? He signed in Michigan because he's like, that's the experience I want to go with. You know, that type of thing. And that's where I see it as incredibly powerful.
Where it's very powerful, very useful.
Exactly.
You know, you put VR on a drone and sell a house.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I'd like to thank our panel, Phil and Stephen and Josh.
Thank you.
And if you'd all like to give a real hand into the virtual audience out there, a virtual hand.
Always great seeing you.
It's a pleasure.
Phil?
And thanks B&H for sponsoring this
Long
panel.
handshake,
Long
but
handshake,
we'll get there.
yeah. We'll hug it out later.